Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Reframe series. And today we are talking about feminist empowerment with Manu, who is currently in India. So,
Yeah.
Manu, take it away. Tell us a little bit about just like where you are and how you're feeling and how you're doing.
I'm feeling currently very hot. The temperature has definitely changed dramatically. Literally today. It was like sweater wearing weather yesterday, but now I'm like dripping. But anyways, so yeah, like Arpita said, my name is Manu Multani. I'm a PhD student in anthropology and social change, focusing on several different things. But this question of feminist empowerment really is something that's been circulating between Arpita and I for a very long time, if I might say, because we lead different diasporic lives and we always tend to kind of mentor each other and try to make sense of our lives based on the complexities of being Indian in an American context. And I think now being in India and kind of also thinking about what's happening in the cultural heritage sense of like practicing feminism and what empowerment really should mean in the Indian context and not in the Western context, and how it's actually different, right? And so, Arpita, I remember you mentioning something about how the Indian context of empowerment needs to include economics, right?
Yeah. So I was just thinking. So I think there are a couple of things that I'm constantly thinking about when I think about what really leads to empowerment for women in society, for both myself as a woman and as I think about in the future, if I have kids, or as I think about looking at the past, my own relationships with my mother and my aunts and the women in my life. And I think economics plays a huge role in our perspectives of what is possible for us and what we are willing to fight for. So I think that there's been, I think when we as women are encouraged to marry really early in life, we are not really we don't ever have the conversation of what are we giving up when we marry early. I think it's like this idealized thing that is this romance is always it's always romanticized, this concept of love, but a marriage is not just you loving someone and being in a relationship with them, right? It also comes with conditions. And when you are an adult, a loving relationship also involves a lot of responsibility. And by encouraging ourselves, our women, our young girls to get married very early, we are basically denying them the opportunity to have their own personal freedom and develop their own personal sense of self and their own desires. And instead, we are saying it is only okay for you to be in this, like, yourself if you're in the role of wife or mother. And I think a lot of women never get the opportunity to have their own independent sense of self by earning their own income, living on their own, learning about their own preferences, their likes, their dislikes, what they want to do in life, and allowing that to be okay outside of being married. And sometimes marriage is not the right answer for everyone. Sometimes, like, it can actually really, really hurt you if you marry the wrong kind of person, the kind of person who might be discouraging you, or because you are in a relationship that requires a certain level of responsibility, that you have to give up your own personal desires or passions or goals in life in order to maintain this relationship. And I think it's important to have that conversation as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And yeah, you brought up a lot of things that infringe on one's self-sufficiency when this context, this practice of trying to empower women is also done incorrectly, right? Is when certain organizations or like Western-based organizations come into India thinking, oh, we're going to end child marriage, or we're going to empower women by giving them these like micro loans, and this is going to solve their issue. That's like a piece of the pie, and it is a huge undertaking for any organization to say, oh yeah, we're going to do this full sweep and we can answer every single facets of that issue. But I think the important point is to recognize that the Indian context is so embedded into complexities that are related to religion, that are related to social stratification through caste, that are related to not just economic sort of bearings, but also the societies in which you live, learn, and grow, right? And so all of those things are kind of taken out of context when it comes to understanding empowerment more broadly, I think transnationally, because then you think it's kind of the same sort of uniform definition, and then there's the same sort of uniform approach, right? And how to like sort of resolve that, or how to sort of like approach feminism, or how to encourage empowerment. And I think a lot of those sort of things that you mentioned are like the nuances that are kind of missing in the stories of like, what are the challenges of empowerment? Like, let's talk about that. Like what are things that are really happening? And I want to share a story to kind of pivot back into this point. So I was having a conversation with somebody recently who was, what it seems like, was forced into an arranged marriage while she was a graduate student of law here in Punjab, and was really had the potential to become a high court judge here in Punjab. According to her friend, that was also part of this conversation that I was having, who was saying that, I really wish she tapped into her potential, that she was given the opportunity to pursue further her education and her career, rather than having to fall into the institution of marriage because that's what her parents wanted her to do. And like sort of speaking with her, human rights, international human rights was kind of her focus. And she's like always been about that life. But it was something that was kind of contradicting, right? Because it's like here she couldn't feel like she had the human right to really just voice what she wants to do. And she had also shared that, she told her parents that even after getting married, she wants to go back to school. But they were like, no, you're not going to use this. What's the point? And she's like, I have these lingering exams that will make me certified and make me at least have the potential. And, while I, coming from the US with my own Western mindset, was undoing one of the biases where I was like, why didn't you stand up for yourself? But then I sort of stepped back and I was like, well, she did stand up for herself, because when your mom, when your dad, when your brother, when your sister, when your grandma, when everybody who's living with you is telling you otherwise, how are you even going to feel like your voice is valued, right? How are you even going to feel like you have something valuable to say? So then how do you actually then, like you had mentioned earlier too, like how do you step out of your home to be an empowered person outside of the home when you're not an empowered person inside your home, right? And so like these examples, or this example of her story, was just sort of like, how is she going to navigate her life? She was married off to somebody who lives in California, who is a truck driver. She didn't know what city he lived in, and kind of was like, I had to just kind of go with the flow. And somebody from the outside would be like, oh, she's so naive. What happened? Why did that happen? How come she isn't so invested? Well, when your heart and your soul and your passion is not aligning with that, why would you be invested? And then on top of that, then that's an additional struggle to have to balance now another person in your life who then now is going to be like, well, your family doesn't even care about you. Why should I care about you? You know, like I see they're taking my side, so I don't have to put any much effort into taking your side. So that lays such a terrible foundation, excuse me, like a terrible foundation into how you can even like pivot onto anything else, you know, like how do you even spring yourself up from something like that? And I think that's the context that is really missing, especially as like mass immigration's happening, you know, diasporic folks are coming back to India, trying to understand India, and like, you know, all of these things are now starting to surface and I hope they're talked about more and understood better in order to do something.
Yeah. I think we all like, there's like, I'm on Instagram and I see a lot of folks talking about breaking generational traumas, and what that means. And I think it's also important to discuss how are generational traumas created, and like what is the underlying context in which all of these things happen, right? And it's like this compounding experience, a compounding of experiences in which you feel like you have absolutely no control over the direction of your life, and your voice is not given prominence or taken into account when those decisions are made. And that's really, really hard. It's, and especially as a woman, like, you know, when you feel like you have no options but to kind of follow these things, and this concept of like feminism, it just seems like a very abstract thing when you're in the real world and you're having to deal with these challenges where you feel like you have no social supports.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And I know this hits home a lot for a lot of us, you know, and yeah, and it's the truth that there is an intersection with so many other facets of your life, you know, and that it does have multi-generational effects too. Um, how these institutions and these legacies are carried forward, along with all the mental health repercussions that also then are also carried forward through these sort of tools, and these legacies, these rituals and traditions, you know. Um, yeah, yeah. And I kind of want to go back to a point that you had made, you know, like the romanticizing concept of love. Um, how do you think that fits in the Indian context?
I think it's really strange, and I'm just speaking of my own personal experience, right? I can't
We
speak,
both are, yeah.
but I can say that when like I think we're raised to believe that like you watch these Bollywood movies, and or I've watched these Bollywood movies, and I've felt like, oh, there's like this love thing that will solve any challenge, and it will, you know, create pathways for you in life, and it will open up these things, and people, like when someone really loves you, they'll do this, this, and this. And I think when you have that type of mentality, you know, sometimes things do go that way, but most of the time, a lot of it has to do with the character of the person that you are marrying. And if you're so fixated on this concept of love, you can't see the person who's directly in front of you and whether they're actually a good match for you as is. Um, and so I think teaching, or at least for me, I wish someone had been more like just kind of straightforward and honest about like, hey, like you need a very like functional, like healthy, strong relationship, and those things require you to like you to be like show up as your full self, to have your life together, to have you know, like to develop the sense of self-respect, to have the self-love, to be financially stable, and um, and then when you enter a relationship, you can approach it from a very healthy space and manage it no matter what, no matter how the relationship is going, rather than like, this relationship will solve your problems, or it will, fix everything in your life. Or it'll give you freedom, right? I think oftentimes it can be very appealing to fall into the trap of, oh, I can escape my current situation if I add on this new person, without understanding that you're adding a lot of additional complexity to your life and having to manage a lot of things when you're adding on this additional person.
Yeah. And you're alluding to this concept that women have to grapple with, because your liberation is tied to a man, right? Like in a patriarchal society, in an Indian patriarchal society, your liberation is, oh yeah, your dad is the one who's controlling your liberation, or your grandfather or your uncle is controlling your liberation when you're not married. Then when you're married, your husband is, and his family is, and you're free in that sense that you're let go of your former family and then given into your new family. And then your liberation is supposed to be centered through that family's definition, versus like, no, my liberation is my own, and that I need to determine my own freedom, and I need to determine sort of what makes me happy and fulfilled and growing, and what I'm bringing into the relationship, versus how you're saying, right? It's kind of like the institution of marriage in itself is romanticized to falsely make women believe that their liberation is tied into marriage, right? And that's how you get your freedom, is that you are a liberated woman if you are actually a wife, because now you are in like this privileged sort of social category now, right? Like, being a wife now and being able to do like research in India too definitely gives me a lot of privileges, actually, now that I think about it, like reflecting on it, is that, people respect you more. People have this anticipation that they can talk to you about mature things like sexuality because you are married now, about these things, So it's like really interesting then to kind of see the way marriage is kind of like formed into the social construction in of itself for women, and how it's become like an identity tool.
Yeah. No, that's so deep. It's, yeah. No, as I'm hearing you talk, I'm like thinking about my own life. And I think even in my own family, like, growing up, I think there was a sense that like, like my father was supposed to be the one that kind of managed the credit cards or did this and did that. Right. And why is that? Like, why is it that we grow up with the sense of like one person should have control over the finances rather than that both people should be financially empowered and being, and have their own assets? Like, why? I think we really, really need to start questioning ourselves more of like, why is it that we feel that women are always supposed to be like more in the caring role? Why is it that they can never be the person in the relationship who is the star or the one receiving the spotlight?
Because then men will feel like they have nothing to live for. Just kidding. Not really though, but
like it's not a binary thing. I think for me it's more like the power that people want to hold on to is associated with a binary thing, right? That if we keep marriages heterosexual, if we keep women in a subjective kind of role, subjugate them, if we keep on continuing this institution, then the people that have power, i.e. patriarchal men, then they'll continue to have that power, right? So that's the real challenge, is that being able to unleash yourself for something like that is really challenging. Okay. This right here, this is a thing that I really want to address, because I I often think about this a lot, which is that people who desire to hold on to power are actually they're the more powerless person in the relationship in some ways, because their own
It's sad, yeah.
insecurities, their own fears prevent them from having the peace and the sense of self within the relationship that would actually allow it to foster its growth.
Totally.
So I like, and I think this idea of control, right? There are not very many things that you can actually control in life. You when you have more money and more financial stability, you have more like control in terms of your day-to-day life. But a lot of things, they end up being outside of your control, and the flow of your life doesn't move according to your plans exactly. They're impacted by significant life events like birth, death. A lot of things happen. Sickness happens, and it's something that if we allow ourselves to accept and move forward with, I think we're a lot happier.
Yeah, I think you took it exactly where I've been hovering these last few days, right? That it's not just an effed up world for women, it's an effed up world for men too, and there's so much pressure to be the breadwinner. There's so much pressure to be a proud, strong man, who's like muscular and has his shit together and can like fight anyone, like as if that's all you need to do in your life. But like the point is that it's so ingrained that you're supposed to be such a certain person, regardless of gender, and in a non-binary situation too. Like it's so ingrained in you that you're supposed to be a certain version of your person that you actually aren't your person, and that like those sorts of vulnerabilities then get shoved away, put away, and then you're on this constant battle with yourself, and then you're in a constant battle with other people, and then you're just perpetuating these cycles, and then it's just sort of like, well, who the F's happy? Nobody then is fucking happy. Like, what is this society we're living in when you can't feel like you have the resources and the tools that you need to address your vulnerabilities, and then you're afraid, and then it's through fear that you're like operating to exhibit this control, because that's the only way you feel reassured that you exist. It's a really sad and fucked up way to live. And yeah,
It
I
is.
think, yeah.
It really is. And it's hard to feel that like that's how most people live their lives. And what does a world look like in which you actually get what you want, like what, and your desires, and you're able to express them, and those needs are able to be met. Like that's such a like a fantasy for most people.
Yeah, and it's also sort of the sad truth, because like, you are in a place where you're just trying to contribute to the struggle, and you're hustling, and you're just living in a capitalist society that really isn't telling you healthy or not, it's just telling you go, 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 there's like no room to kind of spend time with yourself, to spend time with your family, to understand one another, to communicate, to learn how to communicate. Like children nowadays are not really given that opportunity either, right? Like everything's so digital, so individualized, and so focused on computers and phones and stuff that even communication is getting affected. So if like those basic premises on how you're supposed to connect with people and make conversation are now being revised and all this stuff, like reframed, then how are you going to become an individual that can ask the right questions, that can voice your own voice, So yeah, it's definitely a a really convoluted way of living. Not that I'm saying that I have my shit together, but I'm just sort of saying that I like, just truth be told, like we're all struggling, and it's become a realization definitely in my life that I'm just sort of like, wow, this is a trap. Like this is frankly a trap. Like I've been living my life so passively where, I'm just sort of like, well, these are the milestones I'm supposed to hit. Like, this is great. This means I'm successful, right? If I'm hitting these milestones. But it's like, no, what truly makes me happy? Like I need to focus on that. What's truly making, and I don't know if that's like a Western way of living too, is like really centering your own happiness and like being so individualistic about it. But even here, in India, like youth are thinking about their futures and they're thinking about what's going to make them happy. And it's really sad because they're coming from a place of hopelessness because not having a pathway kind of set out for them, So it's kind of flipped where it's like where we can feel like we have a certain pathway and we're supposed to hit these milestones. Like there are jobs for us, there are careers, there is an education, you're going to get something out of it, ideally, right? But like here, a lot of folks that are in college, and universities and stuff and trying to complete their graduate school or whatever to become lawyers or doctors and stuff like that, really find it challenging to be hopeful because they are so uncertain whether or not they're going to get a job and what kind of job they're going to get, because they know that if they do then get a job, what more sacrifices they're going to have to make because they're not well paid, they're not benefited, they're not in their hometowns, they're not able to take care of the families, like all of these things. And then we're kind of like circling back into economics, right? Then women are kind of the ones that are pulled back when all of these uncertainties are what you have to face after you do go through school. So then it's like, well, what's better? One person just faces that uncertainty, and that's the son or that's the husband, right? So yeah, it's a very complex sort of situation when you talk about the context of empowerment, and sort of how that can be a lived reality.
Yeah. And I think it is often really hard because I think this concept, so there's I think the individualistic perspective and the more of the community or family centered perspective, they're very two different approaches to life, and they're both beautiful in their own ways. But sometimes the family does come at the cost of the individual, and for everyone, there are a lot of compromises that get made and to make a healthy functioning family, and when you want that kind of life, like you really value and prize those things. And like in the US, we have very individual lives, and it produces another type of community, right? I think where everyone is kind of going after their own dreams, going after their own desires. But we don't have that deep sense of community that exists within the Indian context, or the same level of social support networks that exist as well. So there are a lot of positives and challenges that arise with each kind of sense of how a community works. I just find it really sad sometimes to think that, like, and when I think my only version of what like a community or a family centered version of life means, as a woman, would be to have to give up like my strong sense of self, and like as someone who's like overcome a lot of challenges in my life, finding a partner who can, feels the same things, and is able to like have also managed those same kind of challenges or been able to do similar. I think those are like really important. And I think it's important to have conversations with women about not just finding any partner or what the outside image of that partner looks like, but what are the internal feelings that you have, and do you feel strengthened? Do you feel empowered when you're with someone, or do you feel disempowered? Do you feel like you are in an obligation and it is a responsibility that you have to fulfill, which in some sense, like a marriage always is, but also that you're receiving the positive support and the strength that you need to also be the version of yourself that you really want to be.
Yeah, those are great questions, I think, for any relationship, right? Not just a marriage, but a friendship or a relationship with your boss or with your professor or fellow students or fellow colleagues, right? It's like your peers, like, is this like a happy and supportive conversation? Do you feel energized or drained after those conversations? Do you feel like you are mutually giving and receiving in these relationships, right? Like, I feel like those are also the things that we often don't kind of consider because we're also still trying to discover ourselves. But if you start asking those questions could be really helpful in sort of navigating what is it that you really want, and then what is it that you want to prioritize, right? And so you give your time to those sorts of things, and then hopefully that's where you find what's fulfilling for you. And then comes a partner, and then those conversations, because you've done that introspection, that you kind of have considered this in other relationships that you have. You like this about your mom. You don't like this about your mom. Like, you know, I know that these are things that you're subconsciously also doing already, but like, you know, then you can take that and then bring that sort of like sense of, okay, this is my control. This is what I want, like, out of this relationship, and then take that on into romantic relationships, right? And I think that's also the thing that's kind of missing, is that you're not really trained to think that way, right? You're kind of trained to just focus on the hustle and do what you need to do. And then eventually your partner will be fine. You know, like, it's like a secondary thing. But yeah, I think knowing yourself and being able to ask those questions is really important. That's such a big step.
Yeah. Are there, yeah, I mean, I got asked this question. I would love to know your perspective too on what do you think, for yourself even, like, what do you think would be more, like, what are the things that could be done differently to make you feel that you have more strength or power or support in your own life as a woman?
Ooh, that's touching.
Those are some hard, yeah.
That's touching a nerve. No, it's not. It's not a hard one. It's a multivariate answer, you know. And then it also sort of, you know, varies on your goals for your life. You know, like, you're an evolving person, so empowerment's going to evolve for you too. You know, like, what do you need? And like you said, you learn how to sort of like understand and differentiate between, okay, is this a sacrifice or is this something I really want to do, right? Is this like really making me happy while I'm like trying to do something for myself, or is this also bringing harm to someone I love and I don't want to do that, right? Like, those are very hard to grapple with issues, right? Which is why I think, you know, coming back to like women making not being able to make the decision or like to stand up for themselves or whatever, is because they're like, I don't want to harm the rest of my family. The rest of my family thinks this is what I'm supposed to do. So how am I going to come up against that? If 10 people are saying this is what I'm supposed to do, what's the harm in that? I'm the one that's going to bring the harm, right? And so I think eventually those are the kind of conversations that you have to kind of like differentiate. It's like, where's my happiness and where's the harm, you know? And I think from my life, like, I've definitely shifted the way I kind of approach my family. and sort of see, if we don't see eye to eye, try to see eye to eye, or try to see their perspective, because I've shifted my way of thinking. Before, it would be like, okay, like if my family is like saying something that I think is like very anti-feminist or whatever, I'm like, anger is my first response, and then like frustration, and then I'm debating, and then I'm like kind of like going at it, and I'm like, shit, I'm freaking exhausted, But like now I'm sort of like, okay, well, what could have been the situation in which that made you think that way? And then I think that's empowering for me, because I have control over my own emotions, and I have like the discretion to be strong enough in my arguments, because now I'm like, oh, I'm trying to understand you, like I love you, and I care about where you stand and where this issue is. But now I'm actually like in a place where I can like emotionally filter through what you're saying and be able to like meet you where you're at, but then also be like, hey, listen to me too, And I think that's like the struggles with empowerment, is that you kind of need to figure out where you can stand your ground, and what battles you want to fight,
Yeah.
You kind of have to figure that out too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is good, because I think it kind of creates a more honest lens of like, it's not a like this. We live on a spectrum, right? And our experiences of life that's very based on like kind of where we live and who we're surrounded by and what we have access to, and our ability to even feel like that feminism is a thing that can be possible, and that's okay. Like we don't need to like move to this 100% pure amazing state, like
utopia. Sure. Yeah.
I think if we can take small daily steps just for ourselves to do things that make us feel empowered on a daily basis, that's good enough.
Yeah.
And I think if we get too in our own heads about these things as well, like we may end up, depressing ourselves or making ourselves feel really like a lot of pressure or a sense of like hopelessness about these things. But if we concentrate on this is the immediacy of where I am, and these are the things that I can control, and these are the things that I'm willing to say yes and no to, and these are the fights that I'm willing to fight, and choosing those very select few ones and really just trying to go at them. That's a lot. That's a lot for any individual person to do in their life.
Yeah, it is a lot. It is a lot. And, and not everyone's going to have the opportunity to do even a bit of that, and no effort is too small, and yeah, I think it'd be wrong to convey that that this is easy or whatever, and you're acknowledging that it's not, and that there are ways to kind of approach this from a more personal level to see how it could work for you, and that's the best we can do, is be encouraging, be understanding of where that person is at, and how either of us is struggling with that and how that means for us. Which I think is a good question to actually end with. It's like, what is empowerment? What is feminist empowerment? What does that mean? And I think I'll start with like sort of my vague-ish definition. I think it's understanding where power and privilege really work and operate, and also not just with people with you, but also within yourself, and how you should bring that into a relationship or into a context, because quite honestly, we do. We have power and privilege in different scenarios. even the most oppressed person, could be in a situation where, say with their child, feels like they can exert some power and have a privilege, or, with their partner who is of different gender, or same gender or whatever. But like, we all face oppression in different ways, and we all face power and privilege in different ways, is what I'm trying to say, essentially. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, that we're all kind of in this complex spectrum, like you said, at some point in your life, and how you kind of navigate that is empowerment, being aware of it and how you navigate it.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that sense of like just and being aware of your privileges and also your like the things that oppress you. Yeah.
This is why I don't like to go first, because then the other person can't think of their own definition, or it gets like too like focused on what I had just said, and then that's why I hate. But, yeah.
No, you're fine. I'm so I think for me something that I think for me it's like feeling empowered as a woman is also feeling the ability to feel human, to be able to express all of my emotions. Even, I think as women, it's often being angry, or at least in the American context, being angry or being very passionate is often seen as a very like negative thing, like it's a negative stereotype, whereas like that same passion and the same anger in a man might appear like very like he's a strong, like awesome person whatever. Like a woman
He's
is
a
like
dude.
It's kind of seen almost like the woman is like villainized for the same exact thing. And so I think part of that for me is also like understanding why is it that anger looks so bad on a woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like because that has to do with ourselves as much as it has to do with like the person, right? So I often, and this is something that I have consciously become aware of, and so I think part of feminist empowerment is also just being able to deconstruct your identity outside of what society tells you your identity is supposed to be, or what that idealized version of yourself is. And so oftentimes when I'm in spaces and people have reactions to things, I always have to create like a buffer for myself, right? Which is that this person is responding a certain way. That response, as much as it has to do with my action or behavior, also has to do with that person. And being able to recognize that the person's reaction is not a direct consequence of your behavior. The person's reaction is a reflection of how they've grown up, how they've spent their lives, how they've seen things, and their response to you is going to be based on their individual character, and being able to understand, in that instance, for example, if someone sees you as an angry person because you're expressing your needs with passion, that has to do with them, right? Like that response is their own response. It has nothing to do with you. Like your behavior and your a person can see those things both positively and negatively. And so being able to then reflect back to yourself and say, oh, like, who am I? And self-validate and be able to say, like, this person may be responding to me in this particular way, but that does not mean that I am that way. I am like and I am passionate. I am strong. I am, I have a strong sense of self, and I know what my needs are. So being able to just recognize those things and understand like your own humanness, and understand you're not perfect in how you convey everything, but being able to have that buffer and know yourself, I think is really like, that to me is empowerment.
Yeah, it's very true. I think, yeah, how you sort of, you can, take that sort of tool, I feel like, also into romantic relationships, right? And, sort of like, that's why knowing sort of what you want and what you need in a relationship is very important, before maybe doing a deeper commitment, whatever that may look like for you. But yeah, it's really interesting how sort of managing your own self ends up becoming a strategy and a tool, to feel more empowered. Yeah. And then, do you think there's like a takeaway or something that you think is important to mention?
So I was like, when we were talking earlier, I was like, I want to take out like a chalkboard or like a white sheet of paper and be like, okay, these are the different levels of like empowerment that women are on the spectrum. So I think, in line with that, I think that something that I want to draw out, just like kind of based on what we've been talking about during the session, is that empowerment, like female empowerment, happens on multiple levels, right? It's the personal level, then it's the family, the society, the laws, that are kind of encoding kind of some of those tools of oppression, and so and we can't we can address all of those things at the same time, but we as one individual cannot. And so it's really about like trying to work as much as we can in the areas that we can, in our, basically in our ability to, over our lifetimes, because this is not an issue that's going
lifetime struggle. Yeah. I mean, and there is, I think my takeaway is sort of like, there is a beautiful life to sort of evolve and to sort of, step into. But, everyone's level of disempowerment is also very different, and what they're experiencing. And it's hard to be like, oh yeah, here's just some simple tools and stuff like that. The issue is far more complex than we have answers for. I have answers for. But I hope that like the major takeaway was that there might be some level of encouragement or some more extended conversation that you feel like you can have with a peer or mentor or somebody that you really love and care about. And I hope that for everybody,
yeah.
But
yeah. Well, thank you everyone for watching today. I hope this was an interesting conversation and gave you a lot of food for thought for your own life. And I know it definitely gave me a lot of food for thought. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.